In the shadowed hills of northern Laos, where mist clings to jungle ridgelines at dawn, the first great secret of America's hidden war took shape. Few outside intelligence circles knew that by 1961, the CIA had already established one of its most ambitious covert air networks in modern history. Officially, the United States insisted on respecting Laos's neutrality. Unofficially, the agency was preparing for a long, grinding fight against expanding North Vietnamese operations that threatened to overwhelm the region. The struggle began with a simple but perilous reality: the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the logistical artery supporting communist forces in South Vietnam, was no longer confined to one country. North Vietnamese engineers carved new paths across the Annamite Mountains, weaving roads and storage depots deep into Laotian territory. Each kilometer completed tightened the noose around American and Allied positions farther south. For the CIA, stopping this expansion required something unconventional: air operations that existed only on paper, flown by men who officially weren't there. At the heart of this effort was the creation of a covert fleet. Former World War II transports, like the C-46 Commando and the C-47 Skytrain, were repainted, re-registered, and reassigned to what the CIA called civilian aid missions. Relying on a crudely drawn map and instinct, the contract pilot searched for the landmark that would ensure he delivered the illicit cargo on time. Yet the reality beneath those entries was harsher. Many pilots carried no parachutes, knowing that capture by Pathet Lao or North Vietnamese troops meant certain execution. Faded and declassified, the critical quotes circled in official red ink detailed the precise turning point they tried to conceal. It was a bureaucratic sentence that masked a dangerous truth. Humanitarian flights often transformed mid-mission into tactical reconnaissance. Agricultural supply runs were used to disguise the movement of weapons and radio equipment. The mountains vanished as the storm front descended, instantly pitching the aging transport into violent, uncontrollable turbulence. Heavy rains slammed the fuselage like hammers. The altimeter spins wildly as the old C-47 is violently tossed through the worst of the storm. We trusted the pilot's greasy scrawl over the faded lines of the colonial chart, knowing the jungle outside was the only true measure of error. Banking hard against the midday glare, the wingtip kissed the jungle canopy as the pilot fought to stick the landing on Lima Site 36's impossible strip. The empty chair stood as a solemn counterpoint to the hurried activity, its silence mirrored only by the single damning word: missing. The impenetrable green ceiling of the Laotian canopy hides decades of secrets. Faint, distorted outlines of metal below betray the hidden history the jungle seeks to reclaim. Hong soldiers, blending traditional dress with modern arms, stand ready at the mountain perimeter, their expectant eyes fixed skyward for the crucial lifeline of air support. A massive aid pallet begins its final descent into the remote mountain valley, delivered precisely through the bright but difficult atmospheric haze. Under a moonless canopy of blue-black, the distant sound of crushing metal was swallowed instantly by an even deeper silence. The annotation confirmed the worst. The C-47 transport was overdue, and authorization for the search had been mysteriously delayed. Decades of secrets lay spread across the desk, demanding answers the tired historian felt increasingly unable to provide. The blurred history of the wreck is finally revealed. The file is officially declassified. Guided only by the unsettling glare of the panel lights, the C-47 pressed deeper into the unforgiving Laotian void. The next phase of the story would introduce the most iconic and most misunderstood air service of the entire conflict, the mysterious civilian fleet known to the world as Air America. But behind its public facade lay a network of flights and losses that raised more questions than the CIA was ever willing to answer. By the mid-1960s, the name Air America circulated quietly through military outposts from Udorn to Long Tiang, spoken half in admiration, half in disbelief. To the world, it was simply a civilian airline providing humanitarian aid in Southeast Asia. But to those fighting the shadow war in Laos, Air America was the lifeline of an entire covert campaign. Its pilots flew into mountain valleys where no military aircraft dared to land, operating on runways that looked more like scraped dirt paths carved into the edges of cliffs. Every takeoff and landing was a gamble, yet their missions became the backbone of the CIA's war effort. The struggle facing Air America pilots grew more daunting as the conflict intensified. The Hmong forces under General Vang Pao depended entirely on a steady flow of ammunition, rice, medical supplies, and radio equipment. Without these deliveries, their resistance against the North Vietnamese army would collapse within weeks. Air America crews flew C-46s, C-123s, and short takeoff Pilatus Porters, aircraft chosen for their ability to claw into the sky from short runways, often less than 700 meters long. Pilots described the mountain strips, known as Lima sites, as some of the most dangerous airfields on Earth. Lima Site 20A at Long Tiang, for example, was perched between two ridges. A pilot's success came down to seconds and inches. Insight into the daily reality of these missions can be found in recovered personal journals and declassified mission reports. One Air America pilot wrote in 1967, "We were told the mission was humanitarian. Then the crates started getting heavier. We stopped asking what was inside." Another entry from the same year references a clandestine weapons drop marked only as agricultural equipment, a bureaucratic euphemism that fooled no one. These small, telling fragments reveal how deeply the line between civilian and military responsibilities had blurred. The reveal of how many aircraft vanished remains one of the most haunting aspects of the Air America story. The region's unpredictable weather was a persistent threat. Storms rolled in from the Annamite Range with almost no warning, often enveloping entire valleys in dense clouds. Pilots routinely flew by sight rather than instruments, banking dangerously close to jungle-covered mountainsides. Many who disappeared simply flew into a storm bank and never emerged. But other losses were harder to explain. One of the most mysterious cases occurred in March 1968, when an Air America C-46 vanished after departing Lima Site 52. The pilot's last transmission, "We're in the soup again, climbing," suggested they were entering poor visibility. Despite extensive search efforts by both Air America and CIA-contracted Hmong patrols, no wreckage was ever discovered. Villagers in the region reported hearing an explosion late that morning, yet no debris fields were found. The incident remained classified for over 3 decades, and the exact cause of the disappearance is still debated among historians. Enemy fire also played a role in the mounting losses. As the Ho Chi Minh Trail expanded, North Vietnamese anti-aircraft units began positioning DSHK heavy machine guns and later radar-guided weapons along expected supply routes. Air America aircraft, painted in civilian livery and lacking armor, became increasingly vulnerable. Some missions required pilots to land under active fire, unload supplies within seconds, and take off before enemy patrols could close in. One survivor recounted in an oral history interview, "There were times we'd land and see dust kicking up around us. Those were rounds, not wind." Yet, for all the danger, the pilots carried themselves with a strange mixture of professionalism and defiance. Many were veterans of earlier conflicts, Korea, or even the final years of World War II, drawn by the high pay and the promise of adventure. But their job was far more than adrenaline. They were the connective tissue that kept remote anti-communist outposts alive. Without them, Vang Pao's resistance would have withered in the mountains long before the war reached its final years. The deeper mystery lies in the gaps within Air America's official records. Dozens of flights are listed as delayed, overdue, or simply omitted from final reports. Historians suspect that some missions were never documented at all, especially those involving sensitive cargo or covert personnel. At least 11 aircraft vanished without confirmed crash sites. The rugged terrain swallowed the wreckage. Monsoon rains erased scars in the earth. Jungles reclaimed the metal. Families of missing pilots received minimal information, often only a brief letter stating the aircraft failed to arrive at destination. Modern analysis suggests a mix of factors behind these disappearances: poor weather forecasting, hostile fire, mechanical wear on aging airframes, and the near-impossible flight conditions. Yet, at least a handful of cases defy easy explanation. Why certain flights deviated from their planned routes remains unknown. Why some search operations were abruptly canceled is still unclear. The classified nature of these missions continues to obscure the full truth. As the war deepened, Air America's role expanded beyond transport. They would soon support forward air controllers, guide bombing missions, and extract endangered units under the tightest secrecy. And with each new responsibility, the risks would grow. The next chapter introduces the most daring aviators of the covert war, pilots stripped of their military identities and thrust into the skies of Laos under a new, unofficial name, the Ravens. Their missions pushed the limits of human skill and recorded history, and their losses remain among the war's most troubling mysteries. In the high, wind-carved plateaus of northern Laos, where the mountains form natural fortresses of stone and jungle, a different kind of aviator emerged, one whose existence remained unknown to the American public for decades. They were called Ravens, a name whispered among air crews and intelligence officers with a mix of awe and apprehension. These pilots, officially sheep-dipped out of the U.S. Air Force, were stripped of uniforms, rank, and identity. In return, they received one of the most dangerous assignments in the entire Vietnam conflict, flying low and slow over enemy territory to direct airstrikes along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Theirs was a war without recognition, fought from the sky at treetop level. The struggle of the Ravens began with the aircraft they flew: small, lightweight O-1 bird dogs and U-17 skywagons, equipped with little more than a radio, a grease pencil, and a map often outdated by years. These planes were so fragile that a burst of heavy machine gun fire could tear them apart in seconds. Yet, the Ravens had to deliberately expose themselves, circling over enemy truck convoys hidden under jungle camouflage, marking targets with smoke rockets while calling in fast-moving jets overhead. One former Raven described the job bluntly: "We flew targets, not planes." Their chance of survival depended on nerve, improvisation, and luck. Insight into their dangerous missions comes from field notes and once classified briefings from Operation Barrel Roll and Operation Steel Tiger. A 1969 tactical memo from the CIA's Vientiane station notes, "Ravens are essential to interdiction. They must operate at altitudes that maximize visual identification. despite increased exposure to hostile fire. The understatement is striking. Identifying enemy positions required flying so low that pilots could see the faces of North Vietnamese soldiers on the ground. Surviving meant banking hard enough to dodge incoming fire, often returning to base with bullet holes stitched across their wings. The reveal of the Ravens' role deepens when examining the number of lost aircraft, an unsettling statistic. At least 50% of Ravens were shot down or forced to crash land during their tours. Some survived and were rescued by Hmong guerrillas. Others were captured or simply vanished.
A particularly haunting case occurred in September 1970, when a Raven pilot known only by his call sign, Raven 42, disappeared while marking targets near Mu Jia Pass. His last transmission, taking fire, rolling left, smoke out, was cut off abruptly. No wreckage was ever located. Decades later, a Hmong villager claimed his father saw a small plane spiral into the jungle that same day, but no official investigation followed. The case remains open. Enemy anti-aircraft defenses were the Ravens' constant tormentors. As the war progressed, the North Vietnamese installed more sophisticated weapons along the Ho Chi Minh Trail: 14.5mm cannons, Soviet radar-guided guns, and even early versions of surface-to-air missiles. On one mission in late 1968, a pair of Ravens guiding F-4 Phantom jets reported intense wall-like fire from a concealed anti-aircraft nest. One of the Ravens was hit and attempted to glide toward friendly territory. His wingman watched helplessly as the aircraft clipped a tree line and vanished in a plume of dust. By the time search teams arrived, there was no sign of the pilot. For all their risk, the Ravens were crucial to slowing the flow of supplies into South Vietnam. Their low-level reconnaissance exposed hidden fuel depots, truck parks, and supply caches that even high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft struggled to detect. Pilots often flew 4 to 6 hours per mission, navigating narrow valleys where echoes distorted radio signals and cliffs loomed within arm's reach. One diary entry from Raven FAC Steve 23 reads, "The valley was so tight today, I felt like I could reach out and touch the vines. Heard gunfire before I saw it, marked the target anyway." The combination of skill and fatalism in such lines reflects the brutal demands placed upon them. Modern military analysts view the Ravens as pioneers of close air support under extreme constraints. Their techniques, eye-level reconnaissance, low-altitude target marking, tight coordination with jets, would influence U.S. Air Force doctrine for decades. But the cost of innovation was steep. The Ravens' casualty rates remained among the highest of any aviation group in the Vietnam conflict, and their missions left behind a trail of unresolved mysteries: aircraft that vanished without crash reports, missions never logged, and pilots whose fates remain unknown. The deeper question persists: were all the losses purely the result of enemy fire and treacherous terrain, or were certain missions kept secret for reasons beyond tactical necessity? Some historians suspect that particularly sensitive flights, those involving cross-border operations or high-value targets, were excluded from official records, leaving families without answers. As 1970 approached, the covert air war intensified. Air America, the Ravens, and CIA ground forces found themselves stretched across a landscape that was becoming more contested every month. And in the Plain of Jars, the strategic heart of northern Laos, the CIA prepared for its most ambitious operation yet, one that would push pilots and intelligence operatives to their limits. That operation was called Pig Fat, and its air missions would produce some of the most puzzling disappearances of the entire clandestine war. In the wind-swept highlands of the Plain of Jars,
an ancient landscape littered with massive stone vessels, whose origins predate recorded history. The CIA prepared for one of its most ambitious and controversial undertakings of the entire conflict, Operation Pig Fat.
Launched in late 1968, it was intended to break North Vietnamese momentum and give Hmong forces under General Vang Pao a decisive advantage. But the operation would ultimately reveal the limits of covert air power and produce some of the most perplexing aircraft losses of the secret war. The struggle grew from the shifting balance of power across the Plain of Jars. For years, the region had been the heart of Hmong resistance, protected by rugged ridgelines and rapid response CIA air support. But by 1968, North Vietnamese troops from the 316th Division were pressing deeper into the plateau. Their movements threatened to push Hmong villages into full retreat. To counter this advance, CIA strategists and Vang Pao crafted an ambitious plan, a multi-front attack supported by relentless air sorties from Air America transports and covert U.S. bombing missions directed by Raven forward air controllers. Every flight mattered. Every hour of air superiority counted. Insight into the preparation comes from a declassified Joint Task Force report from December 1968. Outcome of Operation Pig Fat depends on rapid delivery of ammunition and precision reconnaissance. Terrain and weather expected to complicate all flight operations. The memo was almost prophetic. Pilots soon found themselves navigating unpredictable weather patterns, heavy fogs and crosswinds that whipped across the plateau without warning. Many Lima sites, temporary dirt airstrips scattered across hilltops, became nearly impossible to access, yet the flights continued. The reveal of the operation's air losses remains one of the most haunting chapters in CIA aviation history. Several reconnaissance aircraft operating near Phu Pa Thi and the Shangquang Valley simply never returned. One of the earliest disappearances occurred on December 13, 1968, when a U-17 reconnaissance plane assigned to mark North Vietnamese troop movements lifted off from Lima Site 85. Its mission logs show a routine assignment: map troop concentrations and transmit coordinates to Ravens. The aircraft's last transmission was brief, visibility thin but workable, sent just after entering a fog bank. No further radio calls were received. The pilot, a contract aviator flying under an assumed civilian identity, was never found. Search teams combed the area for 4 days before the mission was quietly suspended. Other losses were more complex. On December 21st, an O-1 bird dog supporting Raven operations vanished near the Nam Goom River Valley during an attempt to trace a suspected new supply route. The terrain beneath the flight path consisted of steep ravines and thick triple canopy jungle, making aerial search nearly impossible. What troubled investigators was the lack of a distress call. The pilot, known for meticulous radio discipline, should have been able to transmit even in an emergency, but the radio remained silent. Whether the aircraft was hit, suffered mechanical failure, or was forced down remains unresolved. Enemy pressure also intensified. North Vietnamese forces deployed additional anti-aircraft weapons concealed in tight valley passes. A CIA situation report filed during Operation Pig Fat states, multiple sorties encountering coordinated ground fire, AAA concentrations higher than estimated. One Air America C-123K provider, returning from a supply run near Ban Na, sustained heavy damage from 12.7mm machine guns. The pilot barely managed to limp back to Long Tieng with a shredded wing. It was a reminder that even the larger aircraft, once considered resilient, were now vulnerable. Yet some pilots believed there was more at play than simple enemy action.
unexplained deviations in flight paths appeared in certain logs.
Search teams reported that some coordinates listed for missing aircraft were incorrect or inconsistent with known routes. Whether these discrepancies were clerical errors or intentional alterations remains debated.
One retired CIA analyst later remarked, "Pig fat operated in a fog of war, but also a fog of paperwork." The comment hints at the bureaucratic layers that often obscured what truly unfolded during those frantic weeks. As the operation dragged into early 1969, the emotional toll on pilots and ground crews became evident. Diaries recovered from Air America personnel describe exhaustion, fear, and frustration.
One entry reads, "Every day the weather closes in and the enemy moves closer. We fly into cloud walls and hope we come out again." Another mentions the psychological strain of knowing fellow pilots had vanished without explanation. When you don't find wreckage, you start wondering about everything. Despite the air support, Operation Pig Fat faltered. North Vietnamese forces proved too entrenched, too numerous, and too well supplied.
The plateau's unpredictable weather grounded aircraft at critical moments, intelligence gaps widened, and the disappearance of reconnaissance planes deprived commanders of crucial information.
By January, Vang Pao's forces began a slow, painful withdrawal.
The losses from pig fat left a trail of questions that would linger for decades. Were some missions so sensitive they were deliberately excluded from records? Were certain reconnaissance flights operating deeper into contested territory than officially acknowledged? And why did several disappearance cases receive minimal follow-up investigation? As 1969 unfolded, the CIA doubled down on its air campaign across northern Laos. Bombing intensified, Ravens were pushed to fly even lower, and Air America expanded its reach across enemy supply corridors. But with this escalation came greater danger, and soon new disappearances would emerge from the mountains and jungles of Laos, deepening the mystery of the covert air war. The next chapter would bring the conflict to its most intense phase yet, where every flight risked becoming the next unsolved case, and where the secret war's most troubling questions would take root. By the early 1970s, northern Laos had become one of the most heavily bombed regions in the world. Yet its dense jungles and twisting mountain corridors continued to conceal the arteries of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. For the United States, stopping the movement of North Vietnamese troops and supplies through Laos became a final, urgent priority. The CIA's covert air campaign expanded once more, and with it came some of the most intense and mysterious aircraft losses of the entire conflict. This new phase, defined by operations like barrel roll and the expansion of Raven-directed strikes, would push pilots and intelligence officers into the very limits of survivability. The struggle grew harsher as the North Vietnamese reinforced their positions. They carved sophisticated bunkers and disguised truck parks along the borders, installing DSHK heavy machine guns and radar-assisted anti-aircraft batteries in places where pilots least expected them. At the same time, monsoon patterns shifted unpredictably, flooding valleys with thick banks of fog and rain that rendered navigation nearly impossible. Air America, the Ravens, and U.S. military support aircraft found themselves operating in a sky that could turn deadly without warning. A veteran pilot summarized it simply: Laos became a place where every flight felt like a coin toss. Insight into the scale of the air campaign comes from once classified 7th Air Force summaries detailing sorties flown under Operation Barrel Roll. Between 1970 and 1971, hundreds of missions were launched monthly, often relying on covert reconnaissance from Air America or Raven forward air controllers. One such report notes,
Increased AAA concentrations along the Mujia Pass require low-altitude ingress routes, FAC survivability decreasing. These memoranda paint a picture of a conflict increasingly defined by improvisation, split-second judgment, and the brutal reality that air supremacy did not guarantee safety. The reveal of aircraft losses during this period is particularly grim. Some aircraft were shot down in clear combat circumstances, but a significant number simply vanished, leaving behind no crash sites, no radio calls, and no witnesses. One of the most puzzling cases occurred on March 11, 1971, when an Air America Helio courier departed Lima Site 19 for a routine reconnaissance flight along the Nam U River. The aircraft carried 2 crew members and a CIA liaison officer. Weather was reported as clear with scattered clouds. The courier never arrived at its destination. Despite several days of aerial search, not a single piece of wreckage was found. Years later, a village elder claimed he heard an explosion in the jungle that morning, but the reported location conflicted with the aircraft's planned route. The case remains unresolved. Another loss occurred during a covert extraction mission in June 1971, when a Raven-led air team attempted to rescue a Hmong unit pinned down near Phu-Kut. The Ravens flew ahead to mark enemy positions, weaving through pockets of mist and climbing along narrow ridgelines. 101 Bird Dog vanished after reporting heavy ground fire. The pilot's final words, "trying to climb out, taking hits," were followed by silence. Rescue teams found no wreckage. Intelligence analysts speculated the aircraft may have crashed into a cloud-covered slope, but without evidence, the fate of the pilot became yet another unresolved entry in the secret war's long ledger of disappearances. Enemy ingenuity played a significant role in these mysteries. North Vietnamese forces began moving anti-aircraft guns into unexpected positions, embedding them in ravines, disguising them under woven jungle canopies, and rotating their firing points to confuse aircrews. Some CIA records allude to suspected AAA traps, areas where pilots were intentionally funneled into kill zones by misleading reports of enemy activity. Whether these traps contributed to the unexplained disappearances is still debated by historians, but their existence highlights the tactical chess match unfolding in the skies. As the air campaign intensified, the emotional burden on pilots and crews deepened. Diaries recovered from Air America personnel speak to a mixture of frustration, exhaustion, and fatalism. One pilot wrote, "We fly aging birds through impossible terrain against guns that weren't here a year ago. The missing, there are too many names now." Another account from a Raven FAC describes returning to base after guiding a strike, only to realize that the aircraft that had taken off beside him before dawn had never returned. The absence of information, no radio call, no sighting, haunted crews more than confirmed losses. Modern analysts reviewing declassified documents have identified several factors that likely contributed to the era's surge in unexplained disappearances: sudden microbursts of weather, the cumulative wear on overused airframes, navigational errors caused by magnetic anomalies in the mountains, and the rapid escalation of enemy anti-aircraft defenses. Yet some cases defy simple explanations. Flight logs with missing segments, missions marked only with vague descriptions like special cargo, and abrupt cancellations of search operations all raise troubling questions about whether some flights were part of deeper covert activities. And then there are the crash sites discovered decades later, found by villagers, archaeologists, or joint recovery teams. In some instances, fragments match aircraft missing since the early 1970s.
In others, the pieces do not correspond with any known loss. The jungle, relentless in its growth, hides and distorts history, leaving investigators to wonder which stories remain concealed beneath the undergrowth. As the conflict neared its final years, pressure on the CIA and its air assets intensified. The disappearance cases, far from slowing down, began to multiply.
Pilots flew deeper into contested territory, often with less intelligence and greater urgency. And for many families back home, the war's end would not bring closure.
The next chapter would see the war's final unraveling, the withdrawal of American forces, the collapse of Allied positions, and the lingering mysteries that remained sealed for decades after the last aircraft left Laos. Some answers would emerge through declassification and investigation, but others, even today, remain locked in the mountains and jungles where the final flights vanished.
By 1973, the secret war in Laos had reached its final, turbulent stage. The skies that once echoed with the constant hum of Air America transports and Raven FAC aircraft began to quiet as American involvement drew down.
But with every step toward disengagement, a new layer of uncertainty settled across the mountains and valleys.
Families waited for news of missing aviators. Intelligence officers sorted through years of incomplete mission logs and classified reports. And in the remote highlands, where jungle reclaimed the remnants of crashed aircraft, the most enduring mysteries of the covert air campaign continued to deepen.
The struggle of this final chapter took on a different character. It was no longer just a battle for territory or supply lines. It became a struggle for information, for clarity, for closure. As U.S. forces began withdrawing from Southeast Asia, many of the operational networks that had sustained the covert war collapsed rapidly. Airfields once bustling with activity fell silent. Hmong units that had depended on CIA air support found themselves isolated as North Vietnamese pressure intensified.
Pilots who remained flew with diminishing resources, outdated navigation charts, and failing airframes. "We were flying ghosts of aircraft," one Air America veteran recalled. "They had more patchwork than original skin."
Insight into the final months comes from declassified CIA cables sent between early 1973 and mid-1974.
One transmission from Long Tieng reads, "Air assets limited. Several flights canceled due to unknown threat activity along previous routes."
Another notes the logistical strain of evacuating personnel while still supporting Allied forces. Requests for extraction exceed current capacity. Airframes unreliable. Weather conditions deteriorating. The cables convey a sense of urgency, bordering on desperation, as the secret war neared its end. The reveal of what happened during these final flights is among the most enigmatic chapters in the history of covert aviation. As operations wound down, several aircraft vanished under circumstances that remain difficult to explain. One of the most haunting cases occurred on February 17, 1973, when a C-123K provider departed from a forward strip near Mong Hiem, carrying a mixed load of Hmong evacuees and CIA personnel. The plane was scheduled to make a short hop to Long Tieng. Weather was marginal but considered flyable. Minutes after takeoff, the provider disappeared from radar. No distress call was heard. Days later, search flights reported seeing a patch of scorched jungle on a ridge, but the terrain was too steep for landing teams to investigate. When recovery personnel returned after the war, no wreckage was found. The case is still unsolved. Another disappearance came weeks later,
involving a Raven FAC assigned to guide emergency strikes near the Plain of Jars as Hmong positions collapsed. The pilot's final transmission, "Target marked, rolling out, will rejoin," sounded routine. Moments later, radio contact ended abruptly. Witness accounts conflict. Some Hmong fighters claimed they saw the aircraft take a hit from anti-aircraft fire. Others insisted it flew into a low cloud bank and never emerged. Without a verified crash site, the fate of the pilot remains uncertain. The broader mystery is compounded by gaps and inconsistencies in the historical record. Some flight logs from 1973 and 1974 contain abrupt omissions, entries with missing times, incomplete coordinates, or vague descriptors like classified tasking. Scholars examining these records argue that certain missions were likely connected to sensitive evacuation operations, prisoner extraction attempts, or the relocation of key intelligence assets. The secrecy surrounding these efforts may explain why some disappearance cases received minimal official follow-up, but it does not explain everything. To this day, discrepancies persist between CIA records, Air America documents, and testimonies from surviving pilots and ground personnel. Several aircraft referenced in oral histories do not appear in official loss lists. Conversely, some documented losses have no eyewitness accounts at all. The fog of war, compounded by the intentional secrecy of the operation, has left modern investigators grappling with a puzzle missing many of its pieces. In the years following the war, joint U.S.-Lao recovery teams began searching for crash sites across the northern regions. Their findings added yet another layer of complexity. Decades of corrosion couldn't erase the vital clue. The serial number pulled from the debris is the missing link in the investigation. Buried in the muddy Nam U Bank, this sliver of olive drab aluminum holds faint forensic evidence of a forgotten flight. Years etched into the creases, the official document was still dense with the vague language of bureaucracy. All eyes focus on the visible mention of flight plans, yet the full scope of the operation is completely hidden from scrutiny. The weight of untold stories rested on his desk. Every box held a silence he was determined to break. Decades of relentless growth have turned the rusted wreckage into a scaffold, where thick emerald vines now choke the twisted metal remains of the forgotten aircraft. The worn boot found cautious purchase on razor-sharp rock and debris, the heavy Laotian mist obscuring all but the immediate danger. In the desolate quiet of the archives, a single shaft of light illuminates the dusty truth of operations long buried.